Welcome to Finance at the Jobsite, the podcast where construction finance meets the field. I'm your host, Rishi Srivastava, founder of Being Human. In each episode, I sit down with construction CFOs, controllers, owners, project managers, IT leaders, ERP consultants, and industry experts to uncover how they connect the back office with the field, choose and implement technology, manage cash flow, and drive profitable projects. Whether you are running the numbers, leading the team, or designing the systems that keep projects moving, this is your place to learn what's working, what's broken, and what's next in construction finance. Today, our guest is Gavin Dick. Gavin, welcome.
Hey, Rishi, thanks for having me.
The theme of this episode is bridging the gap between construction finance and technology. The first section here, Gavin, is on your background and context. Gavin, can you start by sharing a little bit about your background and what led you to specialize in helping contractors streamline their accounting and back office systems?
Yeah, so I'm much more interested in the technology side of things in general, but I have a lot of family in construction. As you know, my parents are CFOs. You've had them on the podcast. Before they really got me into construction, I was just kind of building a whole bunch of different automations and technology systems and stuff like that. And so I built things like, automatic cold email systems, report builders, that kind of stuff. And then they kind of showed me, my parents, that a lot of construction companies are really behind when it comes to any kind of accounting or administrative work. And it's really tough to find people. And they're also super behind in the tech. So they introduced me to some people and, I kind of helped them build some software and systems and stuff in place to where they can streamline their accounting and back office processes and systems a whole bunch. Because again, like I said, it's really hard to find good construction accounting people. And the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah. Generally, construction tech stack, it runs like 20 years behind compared to anything that's state of the art.
Yeah. I think it's also one of those things where, like I said, construction accounting is pretty niche. It's hard to find people who understand it. And so then you have to find people who are technical and then fluent in construction accounting. I think it's just a mess in terms of finding people who understand it and can make the technology work.
Right. What types of construction companies typically come to Atlas CFO for help? And what common pain points do they have when it comes to accounting and operations?
Generally, the companies that come to us are any kind of commercial construction company. So we don't necessarily care about the trade. We deal with just about all of the different trades as long as they're commercial. As for the pain points, usually whenever they come to us, they have like an ERP system and maybe a couple of extra accounting add-ons, but it's not quite enough. And so the people doing the entry, it feels like they're just bogged down, super behind, and they need to hire a bunch of people in order to get caught up, but they can't find anyone who understands it. The staff just kind of feels burned out. And I think it's important to note, from the visibility of different levels in the company, this can manifest in different ways. And so from the people doing the data entry, they feel super burned out, overwhelmed. There's too much going on. And the leaders feel like they have a lack of visibility. Occasionally they might hear that the people are overwhelmed and burned out, but they probably hear that from most employees. And so they don't quite understand it, but they can see that they have a lack of financial visibility. And that's because the employees are so overwhelmed and bogged down, they can't get the data in that's accurate, that we need in order to build any kind of reporting. And so another thing is, a lot of times they either don't have the time to find what software to add, build, or fix, or they do have the time, but they don't have the expertise and they don't want to mess anything up. And going too gung-ho on adding software can cause a completely different problem, because we have these softwares where no one really wants to use or buy into. They don't care about it. And so now we have a bunch more overhead with no real payoff. And so that's usually what kind of companies come to us and where they're at.
These builders, they're very good at building things, but sometimes they're not as good at like back office and tech stuff, IT. Mm-hmm. The next section here is on disconnects in construction systems. You mentioned that most contractors already have an ERP in place, but still struggle with disconnected workflows. What are some of the most common gaps you see between field operations and accounting?
Between field and accounting, usually we have, I'd say, two different problems. So we have the data collection problem, and then we have the data entry problem. And so the data collection problem is kind of from the field side, where they have to tell us like, hey, this is the job that we worked on. Here are the updated costs. Here are the cost codes that we worked on, the hours that we billed to that job, all of that kind of stuff. And so there can be some disconnects there, because a lot of times we don't necessarily have any kind of software in place that makes it super easy and streamlined for our PMs or our field people to tell us what's going on. And so the accounting team has to kind of go and hound some of those people to to get them some of the data. And so like, I kind of mentioned the problem and then thus the fix, which is we kind of usually want to try and find some kind of field or PM software that everybody likes and makes it super easy to input stuff. And then sometimes there's also some kind of incentive planning as well, but that kind of depends on the company. After that, now we fix the data collection problem. Our data is coming into accounting, and so now accounting has to go ahead and enter all of that stuff, so that way we can get say materials or reports sent back out to field, and then I'd say that cycle kind of repeats. And so usually in terms of the gaps, like I was saying, it's data collection, field needs to send in stuff, and the data entry, that's on the accounting side where they need to enter stuff in, then send the stuff back out to field.
Why do you think so many construction companies end up relying on spreadsheets and email approvals, even after investing in major ERP systems?
Most of the time, whenever I see that, the reason they end up doing that kind of stuff is because they don't have a software that does the function they're trying to do. So they're trying to do some kind of manual data manipulation or something like that. And they have to rely on spreadsheets because they don't have any kind of software for it. So for instance, EM or estimating is a big example where the project managers don't have any kind of estimating software. So they use tons of spreadsheets, and then that forces everyone to kind of follow them. Another example is maybe they have two different systems that are disconnected. So they have to pull data from one, do some kind of data manipulation in a spreadsheet, and then plug it back into their ERP. There are some cases where it makes sense to do that. Like if you're doing any kind of what if scenario planning, you kind of want to pull that out of the ERP so we don't do anything permanent, because again, we're just playing around with the numbers. But aside from that, if we have like actual workflows and stuff that are going on that should be happening in the ERP and stuff like that, usually it's because, like I was saying, there's just not any good software for it. So they have to use any kind of, spreadsheets, because again, there's no software for it. And so usually in cases like that, the solution is to get everyone on a call and demo some software and say, hey guys, what do we think of this? Is this a good one? Because we have to get some buy-in, because if they're like, whatever, I'm not going to use that, then we bought software for no reason. So we want to make sure everyone's on the same page. They understand the value. They buy into using the software. And then usually if they understand the value and see how it'd be easier, they'll go ahead and start using it.
All these construction ERPs, let's say like Sage 300, they were built in like 80s, and the architecture is so old, the system's very clunky, star based. You cannot do any data manipulation in there. You have to take it out, and process it some way.
Mm-hmm.
What are some telltale signs that a contractor has outgrown their current accounting or project management setup?
Usually it's a lot of the signs we've already talked about, where the accounting team feels like they're drowning in paperwork. They're super burned out. There's too much stuff going on, and leadership doesn't get any visibility. From the field side or project management side, they'll also feel like there's too much paperwork, but they usually feel like that, poking a little bit of fun at them. And so usually for them, it might be something like reports, like, any kind of WIP reports for the project managers, or material purchases. Those kind of things are perhaps taking too long. Slow payroll is another one. It's a really big one. Usually it's not something we see too often, but if payroll is slow, that either means that the company is in a super bad financial position, or the ERP or whatever kind of software is not working very well and we've outgrown it. And so if you're in that kind of position and you know that, hey, the company's not going to go bankrupt, we know we're in a pretty good financial position, then usually just means that the accounting and HR staff are drowning in paperwork. The systems aren't talking to each other. They're not working, and we have to go find something new.
There's so much transition of ERPs that needs to happen in next 5 years. A lot of these older ones, people are moving out of them because the new capabilities, you cannot easily plug them in like an 80s architecture.
Oh yeah, we're seeing a lot of that too.
The next section here, Gavin, is on integration and automation. When you are evaluating a company's tech stack, how do you decide what should be automated versus what should stay manual for control or compliance reasons?
Usually what we do is we have some kind of a final approval checklist or something like that goes on. And so the actual manual data entry, that is, we try and get that as close to as automated as completely as possible. But then a human has the final say over clicking the buttons on, okay, yes, we're going to pay this person. No, we're not going to pay that person, because accounting kind of touches basically all the different forms of money going in or out. And so in general, we don't want to try and leave this completely up to some software, because again, the software usually just doesn't have enough data to be able to completely do that. And if they do, AI is probably just going to replace all our jobs, but it doesn't have enough data to do that. And so we usually want to have some kind of person in the driver's seat that can approve or deny these requests essentially. And so, anytime an invoice comes in, we want to make sure the person can make sure, yes, this is the correct invoice, this is going to the correct job, and we're good to pay this. Or, time cards, we want to make sure those are correct, all of that kind of stuff. So usually we try and automate the data entry and then the final approval and double checking and all that stuff. That's where we have a person who we leave a person to do that job so that we can make sure that control and compliance is set in place.
We at Being Human also focus on getting AP data into the ERPs. It's such a tedious task for somebody to look at like thousands of invoices and try to type it in an ERP.
Yeah.
Can you share an example of how integrating two existing tools rather than replacing them created a big impact for a client?
Yeah, there's quite a few of those actually. Usually they'll have some kind of, let's say, project management, or a lot of times it's actually a specialty software. So one of our clients, they have a specialty software that's for like estimating and CRM, and they needed to move their ERP software to something different. But their old ERP integrated with their specialty estimating software, but their new one does not. And so rather than replacing this other one completely, we can just go ahead and find some kind of integration. So what we basically did was we set up an import-export workflow that kind of just automatically happens, and it works fine. And so it saves them a bunch of double entry and time like that. And we have other clients who come to us who have systems that they bought that were supposed to talk to each other. It turns out they don't. And so again, that's another thing where they kind of get used to using these things, and we don't want to completely replace them because that obviously causes a big drag on operations, because now people have to relearn a software. And so we can just go ahead and integrate the two and in some kind of way. Like I said in the example, that one's basically a simple import export. So it doesn't need to be this fancy thing that costs a bunch of money and is super time intensive and resource intensive. It can be a simple import export. But whenever we do that, we can save our people tons of relearning tool time. And we can also reduce the time it takes to move these things back and forth. Reduce double entry errors, all that good stuff.
How do you approach connecting ERPs like Foundation, Viewpoint, or Sage 300 to modern automation platforms or bolt-on apps?
Usually I like to take a very targeted approach. And so, we want to make sure we're actually solving the problem that we're looking to solve, as opposed to, just buying software for the sake of software. And so what it starts with is we go ahead and we look at what our current software does and has, and basically what functionality we're missing. And what we do then is we go ahead and lay all this out on a big spreadsheet, and we can say, okay, here's what we have done. This part's done. And we can say these two softwares, maybe they don't integrate, or we're missing this particular functionality, all that stuff. And so we can go through, and then we basically start plugging away, and we say, okay, which one's the biggest problem? After that, we go and we find a couple software that integrate with their ERP. And then we, demo them all, make sure that they're, find the one that is a good fit for them, and then go ahead and implement it. So as an example, let's say we have, AP is a problem, or credit card transactions are a problem, or payroll's a problem. And we can say AP is the biggest problem. We have thousands of invoices. Well, in that case, let's go look at some stuff that integrates with your ERP. And so let's say we find Being Human, and it's a perfect fit, and we're going to go ahead and just implement that one. And then we'll go and look at payroll and credit cards and all the other problems. So I like to take a very targeted approach, and let's look at exactly what we're missing, as opposed to, our entire thing, needs to be automated and we're missing all of this stuff. If we can take a very targeted approach, it saves us a ton of time and money, and we know what we're doing, and we can just, it also reduces overwhelm, because we can just start going through and knocking a bunch of dominoes down.
Yeah. AP invoice and credit card receipt, we do both actually. We're not in the business of issuing credit cards or issuing payments, but like the data flow, the credit card receipt problem, we also solve for that. We just take a picture from a mobile app and the workflow for credit card receipt automation.
Okay.
The next section here is on ERP selection and implementation. For a contractor planning an ERP transition, what should they be thinking about before they start the implementation process?
I would highly recommend looking at the larger ecosystem that ERP offers. And so some of them, they don't have a very open, I guess, like API or marketplace or anything like that. And so you basically have zero ability to bolt on any kind of extra accounting software to automate stuff. And so I would say before looking at anything else, I would look at, we know ideally we're going to grow. And that's the reason that we are looking at an ERP, a new ERP. And so we want to find things that will help us grow and automate a bunch of stuff as well, so that, again, we talked about earlier, there's a huge kind of just construction accounting shortage. There's just not very many people who understand it. And so the further we can make our current staff go with our software, the better for everyone. And so I was just looking at the ERP, making sure that they have these kind of bolt-on apps, this overall ecosystem that works really well for what you're looking for, and then decide on which ERP of those. Usually there's a couple, Foundation, Sage. There's a third one, but I'm blanking on it. But usually Foundation or Sage, those are two good ones that have a big marketplace. And so anyway, you can look at one of those, make sure it fits for what you're looking for. And again, I just highly recommend looking at the overall ecosystem and what they offer there.
Yeah. This bolt-on is so important. And if an ERP has like completely closed system, they're going to have a lot of problem using the ERP. What are the most common mistakes you see during ERP go live, and how can finance teams avoid them?
Usually the most common mistakes originate in implementation. And so if it's implemented wrong or it's built wrong, and basically you have data going to the wrong areas in the ERP, it can cause an absolute mess in the database. And then it only gets worse as you add more data and continue on, with your day-to-day operations. So I think it's worth noting that a lot of implementers, they're great, absolutely awesome at their job, but they don't quite know your particular situation or what works best for your company. And so whenever they suggest things or give you a list of all the potential options or what they've seen work well in the past, I think it's worth noting that you don't necessarily have to take every single one of their suggestions or ideas, because they don't necessarily have to live with the consequences of their decisions, right? And so whenever they're giving you all of these ideas, it's just kind of run them through your head, or this can also be where it can be useful to hire people who have been there before, either full-time or, part-time, whatever. But if they've been there before, they've kind of seen the mistakes and stuff like that, then they can tell you, okay, here's what we've actually seen work well in practice. But, basically you don't necessarily have to take every single suggestion that your implementers say, because some of those can cause, like I was saying, big data entry problems where data's going to the wrong place. It's overwhelming to do, and it just causes a big mess of the database.
Definitely. How can CFOs ensure their ERP and automation decisions are actually driving financial clarity and not just adding tech complexity?
Yeah, so like we talked about earlier, we kind of want to make sure there's a problem to solve. And so I would highly recommend looking at either a very particular set of features that you're looking for in a software, or a step-by-step process that you already do that you're trying to replace. And so, for instance, instead of saying some kind of very large, amorphous, overarching statement of saying, I want my materials to be improved, you dig down to the problem. So maybe we find out that actually we don't necessarily need an entirely new materials platform. It's not materials in general. It's actually just that our field team, whenever they have materials they'd like to request, they don't have a very convenient place to do that. So they send it in wherever they can. So, we get stuff that comes in through email, text, Slack, et cetera. And because it's not in a very easy place to look at, they might send in the same request, 2 or 3 times. And so we have to then go through all of these things, and we have to go through each of these different channels, double check that, okay, is this the same materials request, or do they really need this twice? And so that can cause a lot of problems. And so if we can narrow it down to, instead of saying, okay, we need material stuff in general, we actually just need a field app that allows them to send a materials request really easily, that's all in one place. That could actually be a feature add-on of a current field app that the company's using. And we can just go ahead and turn that thing on, and we've solved the problem. Or, going back to Being Human, if Being Human, it turns out, has a credit card transaction recorder that we didn't even know it had, we don't need to go get a new credit card software. Possibly we could just try and see if we can just go ahead and use Being Human's credit card transaction solution. So that way we've solved it. We, again, try and narrow it down to where we have the exact set of problems or step-by-step thing that we are looking to do, and then we can solve it in the simplest, easiest way possible, as opposed to adding a bunch of software.
Yeah. And if you don't go with a set of requirements, it gets very hard to get any software. You have to know what problem you're solving for. I love that quote from you. The next section, Gavin, here is on financial clarity and process control. Where do you draw the line with automation in construction accounting? What are examples of processes that should not be fully automated?
Usually, I draw the line with basically anything where some kind of software or AI system or anything like that doesn't have complete data on. And so usually that's anything related to payroll or things that the field is doing. So for instance, let's just go with time cards. any kind of software doesn't necessarily know what job the person is on or what cost code they are tracking their time to. And so we have to have a person that enters that paperwork, unfortunately, but it has to kind of get done because the software just basically doesn't exist in the real world. And so it doesn't have any kind of data collection. So until we have something where, either, maybe we have some kind of like AR glasses that can say, okay, here's the cost code they're working on at this particular time. It can save everyone a ton of paperwork. We have to have some person that's entering it. And so we can try and make time cards and paperwork and all that stuff easier with the right software or system or tools. But it's very hard to completely replace it because the systems, like I was saying, just don't quite know what they were doing in the real world. And so we have to have someone actually entering the paperwork. Everything else that's not necessarily like super time card, real world, driven, we can try and get completely automated or as close to that as possible. But basically anything where like people are, like I said, clocking time to particular things or cost codes, that's really hard for AI systems to know, and thus it's really hard for us to completely automate it.
Voice can be a good tool too, but the voice models are actually not there to help people get the data in, like the field people cannot use the voice AI just yet because the models are just not yet there. You cannot say like, hey, I work on a foundation for this particular building for 3 hours and the AI is just going to transcribe and write it.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of stuff like that where it's just, there's too many steps for the field people to have to complete, and then they either won't do it or they maybe mess it up or forget something. And so the simpler we can make it, and like you were saying with a voice model, the simpler it can be, the better for everyone.
That's right. Da Vinci said, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication.
Yeah. Yes, I agree with that.
How do automation and integrations help improve job cost accuracy or forecasting confidence for project-driven businesses like construction?
They tend to do this a couple different ways. So number one is they reduce the risk of inaccuracies. They keep everything up to date, and then they can allow forecasting to get done faster. And so from the inaccuracy standpoint, let's go back to our double entry problem where you have two different softwares that don't talk to each other. If we can integrate that, then all of a sudden we've reduced the risk of double entry because there's not a person who has to go enter it over here and then they have to go re-enter it over here. Whenever they have to do that, there's a risk they hit the wrong button and our data shows up wrong in one place. And then, we don't maybe know which one's the right one, or we have to go do some more digging. Either way, that slows down forecasting or, makes it inaccurate. Another thing it does is it adds, I'd say, guardrails. So if you have any kind of automation, the automation or bolt-on software usually only lets you put it into one area. And so it's not like a journal entry where someone could just go in there and make a journal entry to wherever they want. The software makes this particular, let's just say invoice or whatever, go to a very particular place. And it also can add kind of like a double checking function where it's, let's say, reading the invoice and then pulling all the data from it. And so then again, there's two sets of eyes on it. And so it can reduce inaccuracies in that sense. The up-to-date part and allowing forecasting to happen faster is we can reduce the time it takes us to do all of this stuff. And then obviously that keeps everything up to date because, well, we're doing it quicker. The team's not getting bogged down in all this work. And it also allows forecasting to happen faster because, again, we have all of the data in one place. We're not having to go get it. So there's a lot of stories that I've heard of teams that have to go and collect all of their data at the time that they need to go do their particular forecasting. And so they need to go to basically every single team and get all the data they need to do. Whenever we have it all in one place, it happens so much quicker. It's accurate, it's up to date, all of that good stuff. And so that's how automation integration can help with all of that stuff.
The data accuracy is so important. A lot of these companies, especially the ones that are not using automation, their data itself is garbage because they don't have all the controls in place.
Yep.
The last section here, Gavin's on the future of construction finance tech. Looking ahead, where do you think construction finance teams will see the biggest productivity gains in AP automation, forecasting, payroll, or somewhere else?
I think it really depends on the construction company because some of them might have, a wonderful AP system where they have, being human, and, their AP is essentially taken care of, but maybe their payroll's a mess or vice versa. And so a lot of times I really do think it depends on the particular company. Most of the productivity gains we're seeing right now are basically in any kind of manual data entry. It's, AP, credit cards, bill pay, payroll, all that stuff. That's where the day-to-day work is. And that's kind of the foundation for everything else. Because if we don't have our data entered, if it's not accurate, then we can't really do forecasting from that. So that's kind of the foundation of what we're looking to really automate is any kind of data entry. But in terms of which one of those pieces makes the biggest difference, I really think it depends on the particular construction company.
Companies have payroll as their bigger problem. Yeah, maybe AR is a big problem, right? So the last question here, Gavin, is what advice would you give a controller or CFO who wants to start improving their systems but feels overwhelmed by the number of tools and options out there?
Yeah, I would say there's like a 2 or 3 step process you can do to go ahead and narrow a lot of that and reduce that overwhelm. So number one is we're going to plot out all the processes and systems that you currently use, and then let's look at what actually needs automation. And so basically we want to just go ahead and do this on a spreadsheet. If you don't mind, Rishi, I'll go ahead and throw a quick plug-in. If you go to atlascfo.com/automate, there's a tool we've made. It's called the 1 Hour Contractor Tech Plan. But basically, it helps you go ahead and fill out all that stuff and see where you're actually missing your automations and processes and stuff like that. So anyway, once you have that all plotted out, we then just want to say, okay, let's pick the biggest bottleneck right now. So, maybe it's AP, maybe it is time cards, maybe payroll, right? Whatever that is, let's pick the biggest bottleneck. And then let's go look at the options that only integrate with our ERP. And so if we don't look at any of this, it's super easy to have a list of, 120. I think I have probably a bunch of bookmarks of every single construction automation tool out there. I think it's probably 120 of them right now. There's quite a bit that you can use. But whenever we narrow it down to, okay, we're going to actually look at AP only right now, and we're only going to look at the ones that integrate with our particular ERP. That usually brings it down to 3 to 5, maybe even less tools that you can actually look at. And so that reduces overwhelm a ton. Instead of that 120 that I tend to look at, we actually only have 3 to 5 that we're looking at. And so then we just go ahead and say, okay, which one's best for us? And we pick it, and then we can repeat that for the next process. But I mean, that's it. That reduces overwhelm a whole bunch. It makes things super easy. Like I'm saying, you can go from 120 to 3 to 5 and then just go ahead and repeat that.
Yeah, it's just too many options if you're not narrowing it properly. Kevin, thank you so much for coming on to the show. I had a great conversation with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rishi.
Thanks for listening to Finance at the Job Site. If you found today's conversation valuable, share it with a teammate and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. You can listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or watch on YouTube. Just search Finance at the Job Site. Until next time, here is to building smarter, faster, and more profitable projects.